Aaron Vale was hired to empty a railway depot that had been quiet for 18 years, but his dog treated the place like somebody was still expected to arrive. Every afternoon, Ledger left Aaron's side, crossed the dusty waiting room, and lay down at platform 3, exactly when sunlight touched the cracked station clock. At first, Aaron called it habit. Then he noticed the shadow did not fall on the tracks. It pointed through the ticket window, across a row of parcel cubbies, and straight to a transfer board covered with colored thumbtacks. The depot was silent, but it had been keeping a schedule. Aaron had spent 26 years in Navy logistics, which meant he trusted labels, inventories, clocks, and the small systems people build when the official system is too slow to help. He was not a loud man, and he did not arrive in Briar Junction looking for a cause. He arrived with a canvas tool bag, a thermos, a folder from the county preservation office, and Ledger, a tan shepherd mix with one ear that stood up and one that made a permanent soft fold. The contract was simple. Catalog the depot's furniture, tag anything worth storing, and make sure the benches were ready for pickup before the end of the month. The county called it a dormant property. Aaron called it a place that had stopped being asked questions. Briar Junction's depot sat at the edge of town where 2 freight lines used to meet, and 1 passenger platform still faced the west fields. The roof was sound, the walls were straight, and the big windows had the pale fog of old glass. Inside, the waiting room held 12 benches, a locked ticket counter, a parcel wall with brass-numbered doors, and a clock above the platform doors with a crack across its face. The hands were stopped at 4:12, though the afternoon light made it seem alive for a few minutes each day. Ledger noticed the clock before Aaron did. On the first day, while Aaron worked through the furniture tags, the dog stood near the center aisle and stared through the open platform doors. His tail was low but easy. His nose moved once, twice. Then he walked out to platform 3 and folded himself beside the yellow line painted on the concrete. Aaron glanced up from a bench tag and called him back. Ledger lifted his head, listened, and stayed there. That was not stubbornness. Ledger saved stubbornness for baths and medicine. This was a choice. Aaron gave him 10 minutes, finished measuring the nearest bench, and walked outside. Platform 3 held the warm part of the day. The station clock hung behind Aaron now, visible through the doorway, and the sun came through a high pane broken only by a hairline crack. The light crossed the waiting room floor in a narrow bar and touched the clock, face at an angle. Ledger rested his chin on his paws as if waiting for a person who knew exactly where to stand. Aaron looked at the empty platform, the abandoned schedule case, and the rusted sign that still read westbound. Nothing moved except dust in the light. The second day, Ledger did it again. The third day, Aaron timed him. At 3:48, the dog left the ticket counter, crossed the room, and took his place. At 4:06, he shifted his body half a foot to the left. At 4:12, the sunlight touched the crack in the clock and slid down the wall toward the parcel cubbies. Aaron watched it because clocks and routes had been his trade, and because the dog had not guessed. The light did not wander randomly. It made a clean line from the clock to a cubby marked 3C. Aaron tried the cubby first with the key ring from the county folder. None of the keys fit. The brass door had been painted over at least twice, and somebody had scratched 3 tiny marks below the number. Ledger stood close enough for his whiskers to brush the metal. He sniffed the seam, then padded to the third bench from the platform doors and sniffed the underside of the right armrest. Aaron followed him, crouched, and found the first practical clue. Tucked under the armrest with old tape was a ticket stub, folded into a square so tight it had held its shape for years. The ticket was not for a ride. The route line had been crossed out in pencil and replaced with a name, June Mercer. The time printed on it was 4:12. On the back, in careful block letters, someone had written, "Shelf hinges, Tuesday, green tack." Aaron turned it over twice. A ticket stub was easy to explain. A note about shelf hinges hidden under a bench was not. Ledger nudged Aaron's wrist, not hard, just enough to make him look toward the parcel wall again. There were 36 cubbies, and only one had those 3 scratch marks under the number. The county clerk had told Aaron the depot was stripped of anything valuable, which was true if value meant brass fixtures and saleable antiques. But Aaron knew old transportation hubs kept another kind of value. People left methods behind, not grand secrets, just ways to get through a day. On his 4th afternoon in the building, he brought a small inspection mirror and a can of graphite spray. He had opened corroded storage lockers on ships that had crossed more weather than Briar Junction had ever seen. A painted cubby door did not scare him. He worked the graphite into the old lock, waited, and tried the key marked miscellaneous. The key turned halfway and stopped. Ledger sat behind him, focused on the door, his ears making two different shapes. Aaron did not force it. He eased the key back, cleaned the slot with a folded index card, and tried again while the sun crossed the clock. At 4:12, the room brightened in a narrow stripe. The key clicked. Inside cubby 3C sat a cloth pouch, a stack of tickets clipped with a laundry pin, and a small wooden box filled with thumbtacks sorted by color: green, blue, yellow, white, red, and black. The black tacks had no sharp points. Someone had flattened them smooth. Aaron carried everything to the ticket counter and laid the pieces in rows. Ledger put his chin on the counter ledge and breathed through his nose. The pouch smelled faintly of pencil shavings and cedar. The ticket stubs were all marked with times between 3:40 and 4:30, but the destinations were crossed out and replaced with ordinary tasks: porch latch, ride to clinic, soup pot returned, work boots, size 10, ask Martin about Mondays. A few names appeared again and again, never with last names unless the task involved an address. The colored tacks matched the notes: green for repairs, blue for rides, yellow for meals, white for introductions. The red tacks bothered Aaron until he found one ticket with a red circle and the words: needs steady work, quiet place, good hands. It was not an emergency code. It was a way to say someone needed a chance without turning them into a spectacle. Aaron sat with that for longer than he meant to. In the Navy, he had learned that the kindest systems were often the ones that protected a person's dignity. A supply request could reveal who was prepared and who was struggling. A good officer moved what was needed without making the need the whole story. That afternoon, Nora Finch from the Heritage Council stopped by to check the progress. Nora was in her 60s, sharp-eyed, with a cardigan full of pens and the brisk walk of someone who never trusted committees to remember details. She found Aaron at the counter with tickets spread in careful rows and Ledger asleep at his feet. Nora looked at the tickets, then at the parcel wall. Her expression changed, but not into surprise. It was closer to recognition, trying to stay polite. Aaron asked if she knew what Platform 3 had been used for besides boarding trains. Nora folded her hands around her notebook. She said people waited there. Aaron waited too, because that was not an answer, and Nora knew it. After a moment, she admitted that the depot had been more than a stop. Not officially, of course. The railroad had schedules, the town had offices, the church had bulletins, and the county had forms. Platform 3 had handled the things that fell between those systems. If someone needed a ladder but did not want to ask a neighbor directly, a ticket went into the cubby. If someone had a spare chair, a ride, a shift opening, a kettle to loan, or time to teach a repair, it went on the board. Nora claimed she only knew pieces. Her aunt had worked the lunch counter for a few years, and older residents had mentioned the afternoon exchange in passing. But as she spoke, Ledger rose and walked from the counter to the platform doors again. He did not bark. He never performed for effect. He simply went to the place where the ritual began, lay down, and faced the clock. Nora's voice softened when she saw him there. She said the dog had the right spot, not close to the ticket window and not near the main doors. Platform 3, just beyond the shadow line. Aaron asked why it stopped. Nora said the passenger line ended, the last station agent retired, and the town convinced itself that a bulletin board at the municipal building would do the same job. It did not. The municipal board became notices, permits, yard sales, meeting times, and rules. Platform 3 had been different because people arrived in person at the same hour and stood beside one another without having to announce why they came. A person could point to a green tack and say they knew how to fix a sink. Another could take the ticket and leave a thank you in the parcel wall. Aaron understood that more than he wanted to. After leaving the Navy, he had discovered that civilian life had plenty of doors and very few thresholds. People were friendly in passing, but nobody knew when to step in. Ledger had become his threshold. The dog gave strangers a safe first sentence. Is he friendly? What's his name? How old is he? Those questions had carried Aaron through hardware stores, long sidewalks, and apartment lobbies where he might otherwise have nodded and kept walking. Ledger did not solve loneliness. He made it less efficient. Nora had another appointment, but before she left, she touched the transfer board on the wall behind the ticket counter. The board was covered with a yellowed route map, pinned flat at the corners. Aaron had taken it for decoration. Nora said there used to be a second board under it. She remembered colored tacks, not many, just enough to make the wall look like a small weather chart. When Aaron asked why someone covered it, Nora glanced toward the county tags on the benches. She said people sometimes hide what they cannot bear to watch get thrown away. That sentence stayed with Aaron after she left. He worked the edge of the map loose and found a layer of cardboard behind it, then a sheet of cork gone dry with age. The colored tacks had left hundreds of tiny holes, clustered in neat columns. Along the left side, faint pencil labels remained: green repair, blue travel, yellow table, white meat, red work, gray red. Aaron read the last word twice: gray red. Ledger sniffed at the lower right corner and pawed once lightly. Aaron removed 2 more pins, lifted the cork, and found a folded station schedule behind it. The schedule was not for trains. It used train language, but the columns were local. Arrivals meant people offering help. Departures meant people taking a ticket. Transfers meant introductions between 2 adults who did not want attention from the whole town. Holds meant a need had been met, but the thank you had not been collected. Aaron smiled despite himself. Whoever built this system had a logistics mind and a neighbor's patience. The handwriting was compact, almost square. At the bottom of the page was a note that read, "Keep the 412-hour quiet. Let people choose their own words." Ledger put his nose against Aaron's knee. That was his signal for outside, not urgent, just definite. Aaron clipped on the leash and followed him through the platform doors. Instead of turning toward the lot, Ledger walked along platform 3 to the far bench, the one Aaron had already tagged for storage. It was a long oak bench, scarred but stable, with a split in the center slat and a gum wrapper wedged behind one leg. Ledger sniffed the left support and lay down with his shoulder against it. Aaron crouched, ran his hand below the seat, and felt paper under a metal lip. This one was not a ticket, it was a narrow card from the old parcel office, wrapped in wax paper that had gone cloudy. The card listed 4 names and 1 instruction. Mrs. Vale would have smiled at the orderliness of it, Aaron thought, and then he caught himself because his mother had been gone from his daily life for years without ever leaving his habits. The card said, "Bench 3 stays until the last." Aaron looked at the tag he had tied to the bench that morning. "Storage lot, row B, remove first." He untied it and put the tag in his pocket. That night, Aaron took photos of every ticket, tack, card, and penciled label. He did not post them. He did not call the local paper. The depot did not need attention before it had understanding. He spread the images across his kitchen table in the little rental cottage the county had arranged, while Ledger slept on the chair with one paw touching Aaron's boot. Patterns emerged. Green notes clustered in early spring and late fall, when repairs mattered before rain and cold. Yellow notes clustered around holidays and long weekends. Red notes appeared near factory shift changes, seasonal hiring, and the start of the college semester. White tacks appeared almost every week. They were the strangest and maybe the gentlest. 2 names, no task, sometimes a note like both like early walks or both miss card tables or both no trains, quiet introductions, practical second chances. The town had used the depot to match people who would never attend a formal mixer and would never admit they needed company. Aaron took off his glasses and rubbed the bridge of his nose. Ledger opened one eye. Aaron told him, softly, that this was why he had been waiting. The dog thumped his tail once, as if the explanation was acceptable. The next morning brought Miles Rowe, the contractor hired to move the benches. Miles had a flatbed truck, a yellow measuring tape, and the permanent caution of a man who has had to fit heavy things through narrow doors. Aaron met him outside before he unloaded the dolly. He explained that the inventory had changed. The benches could not be moved yet. Miles stared past him into the depot, where Ledger stood in the doorway like an usher with paws. The contract said furniture removal could begin that week. Aaron knew that. He also knew a bad removal could erase the clues still hidden under armrests and lips. Miles was not thrilled, but he was curious. That helped. Aaron showed him the bench card, the ticket stubs, and the old transfer schedule. Miles leaned on the dolly handles and looked toward platform 3. He said his father used to come home with repaired tools he did not remember paying for. A hand plane, a garden fork, a wobbly side table that returned with its legs straight. When Aaron asked if his father had mentioned the depot, Miles shook his head, then said his father had been proud. He would not have described receiving help, but he might have called it trading. Ledger walked to Miles and sat just out of reach, giving him the choice. Miles held out 2 fingers. Ledger sniffed them, approved, and leaned his shoulder against the man's knee. That changed the conversation. Miles stopped arguing about the schedule and started remembering where his father kept old boxes. By noon, he had called his sister, who checked an attic trunk and found a packet of ticket stubs wrapped with twine. By 3, Miles was back with the packet in his shirt pocket, looking half embarrassed and half relieved. The tickets had green tacks drawn in the corners. Those stubs filled a missing column. They showed replies. Fixed hinge, take no payment. Saw sharpened, ask for coffee only. Table delivered by South Alley. Blue jar returned. Under each note was a small mark like a sideways V. Aaron found the same mark on the bench support where Ledger had first stopped. It was not a signature. It was a check mark, an old station agent's way of closing a loop. Need posted, help accepted, dignity preserved. Aaron pinned the replies beside the requests and saw the board breathe again. Not literally, but in the way a system comes alive when the missing half returns. By the end of that week, the depot was no longer quiet in the same way. It still had dust on the sills and quiet tracks outside, but it had begun to draw adults who came with cautious memories. Nora brought 2 retired teachers who remembered gray tacks for books and reading help. Miles brought a biscuit tin of repair notes. A former dispatcher named Sal Arroyo brought a stack of blank tickets he had saved for reasons he could never explain. Ledger greeted each person at the door, then led them, one by one, toward Platform 3 as the afternoon light moved across the room. Aaron began to understand Ledger's timing through scent, sound, and routine. The dog was not reading the clock. He was reading the depot. At a certain hour, the room warmed. Old wood released cedar dust, oil, paper, and something faint from the parcel cubbies that no human nose could separate. The light moved across the floor, and with it came the old path people had taken from bench to board to platform. Ledger had found the pattern before Aaron had the humility to believe a pattern was still there. The dog had trusted the place before the people did. One clue remained stubborn: the cracked station clock. The hands had stopped at 4:12, matching the ticket times, but stopped clocks are sometimes staged by memory. Aaron needed to know whether the clock had failed by accident or had been set that way on purpose. He called Lucien Park, a retired clock repairer whose shop had once stood across from the depot. Lucien arrived the next afternoon with a felt tool roll and a fedora that looked less like fashion than habit. Ledger took one sniff at the tool roll and followed him as if he were part of the original schedule. Lucien removed the clock from the wall with Aaron holding the ladder steady. The face was cracked, but the works inside were clean. Not new, not neglected. Clean, someone had wound it for years after the station closed. A tiny paper wedge held the minute gear in place. Lucien lifted it with tweezers and read the writing aloud. Last train gone, platform hour stays. Aaron felt the room go still around the word. Not solemn, exactly. Focused. Like everyone present had been handed a missing instruction and knew it mattered. The clock had not broken at 4:12. It had been paused there. The last station agent, or someone after him, had locked the depot's public memory into the hour when people knew to show up. Aaron took the paper wedge and placed it beside the station schedule. Nora pressed her lips together. Miles looked at the floor. Sal reached for one of the blank tickets and held it without writing. Ledger sat below the clock, tail curled around his paws, looking from person to person as if waiting for the next correct movement. Aaron asked who the last station agent had been. Sal answered immediately. Edmund Sy, precise man, always wore sleeve garters, always knew which farmer had spare crates, which seamstress could mend canvas, which driver had an empty seat on Thursday. Edmund had no title beyond station agent, but the town had treated him like a switchman for ordinary life. If 2 people were headed in the same direction without knowing it, Edmund found a quiet way to put them on the same platform. Nora found Edmund's file in the Heritage office 2 days later. It held payroll records, a retirement notice, and a single envelope marked personal property unclaimed. Inside was a brass cubby key tied to a blue ribbon, a pencil worn almost to the metal, and a folded letter addressed to whoever opens Platform 3 with care. Nora brought it to the depot because she said Aaron had earned the first read, but Aaron shook his head. This was not his history alone. He opened the letter on the ticket counter while everyone stood close enough to hear, and far enough to let the words breathe. Edmund's letter was plain. He wrote that the railroad would remember freight counts, timetables, and revenue, but Briar Junction would need to remember what happened in the margin. Platform 3 worked because it did not make people explain themselves twice. A person could ask for a ride without naming every reason. A person could offer work without turning it into charity. A person new to town could meet one steady neighbor before facing a whole room. The colored tacks were not secrets, he wrote. They were manners. Then came the line that gave the depot back its purpose. If the benches are ever moved, check the 3rd, 7th, and last. They carry the rules that were too simple for a rule book. Ledger, who had been still through the reading, stood before Aaron finished the sentence. He walked to the third bench, the one already spared, then to the seventh, then to the last bench nearest the west end of the platform. He did not scratch or whine. He placed his nose under each armrest and waited. The third bench gave up the card Aaron had already found. Bench 3 stays until the last. The seventh held a strip of oilcloth wrapped around a pencil list. Never ask twice if the first answer costs pride. Put offers beside needs, not above them. Close every ticket. Let thanks be private if thanks is hard. The last bench held the smallest card, wedged so tightly that Miles had to loosen the metal bracket with a hand tool. On it, Edmund had written the only sentence that sounded like a plea. Keep 1 hour when nobody has to arrive impressive. That sentence moved through the depot differently than the others. Adults who had been standing with arms crossed let them drop. Nora turned toward the windows. Sal put the blank ticket back on the counter. Aaron felt something shift in his own chest, a pressure he had not named because he had been too busy labeling rooms, benches, cubbies, and tasks. He had spent years making sure supplies reached the right hands, but after retirement, he had tried to carry himself like a sealed container. Useful, sorted, hard to spill. Ledger had known better. The depot's reveal did not arrive as one dramatic secret. It came as a working diagram: clock, cubbies, tax, benches, tickets, platform hour. Each piece had seemed sentimental by itself. Together, they formed a town-sized habit of helping without spectacle. Platform 3 had not been a charity desk. It had been a transfer point for reliability. Someone could bring what they had, take what they needed, and leave with the feeling that they were part of an exchange, not a burden placed in someone else's hands. Aaron wrote a supplemental report for the county that night. It was the kind of report he knew how to write: concise, documented, impossible to dismiss without looking careless. He listed each object found, each physical mark, each witness account, and each risk of removal. He attached photographs and a diagram of the afternoon light. He did not write that the dog had solved it. He wrote that repeated canine behavior indicated a consistent scent and timing path associated with Platform 3. Ledger slept through this professional description with his paws in the air. The county replied with a meeting request, which in Aaron's experience meant the report had landed somewhere between inconvenient and persuasive. The meeting took place in the depot because Aaron insisted objects make better arguments when they are allowed to be present. 3 county officials arrived in clean shoes and cautious moods. Nora brought folders. Miles brought the dolly but left it outside, a gesture Aaron appreciated. Sal brought the blank tickets. Ledger wore his plain brown collar and took his place by Platform 3 at 3:48, giving everyone the strangest kind of agenda. At first, the officials saw old furniture and community nostalgia. Aaron let them. Then he walked them through the system, one clue at a time. The clock shadowed a cubby 3C, the color code, the ticket requests and replies, the bench rules, Edmund's letter, the transfer board hidden under the map. He explained it the way he would explain a supply route, not as romance but as infrastructure. The depot had moved help through the town with less friction than any formal office had managed. It had preserved privacy, tracked completion, and encouraged reciprocity. One official, a woman named Delia Grant, asked the practical question: if it reopened, who would manage it? Aaron had expected that. He had even prepared 3 options, each with staffing hours, volunteer rotations, preservation requirements, and a small budget. Before he could start, Ledger stood and walked to Delia. She froze because she clearly was not a dog person. Ledger stopped 2 feet away, sat, and looked at her hand, not begging, not pushing, offering a bridge. Delia glanced at Aaron, then lowered her fingers. Ledger sniffed, accepted, and returned to Platform 3. The room relaxed after that. It was almost unfair how well the dog did what people tried to do with speeches. Delia asked if the platform hour could run once a week as a pilot program. Nora said twice a week would keep momentum. Sal offered to staff the ticket counter. Miles said he could repair the benches instead of moving them. Aaron listened while the depot quietly rearranged the people inside it. The officials had arrived to decide whether old benches stayed. They left discussing floor sealant, insurance, accessible entrances, and how to protect anonymous requests without letting the board become clutter. The first new platform hour was scheduled for the following Thursday at 4:12. Aaron disliked the name at first because it sounded too neat, like a program designed by someone who had never waited on a platform. But the town chose it, and names matter less than whether people show up. He spent the days before it cleaning the ticket counter, repairing cubby doors, and rebuilding the transfer board with cork that matched the original thickness. Miles refinished the benches without sanding away the marks beneath them. Nora typed simple guidelines that fit on one page and did not scold. Aaron added one rule of his own, borrowed from Edmund but phrased for the present. Offers and requests share the same board. That rule mattered. A board of only requests could make people feel exposed. A board of only offers could make help look like performance. Mixed together, they looked like a town telling the truth. Everyone had something. Everyone lacked something. The colored tacks returned in shallow wooden bowls, with their meanings written on small cards: green repairs, blue rides, yellow meals, white introductions, red work, gray reading and paperwork help. On Thursday afternoon, nobody came for the first 10 minutes. Aaron pretended to adjust the ticket stamp. Nora pretended to review the guidelines. Sal sorted blank tickets that were already sorted. Miles checked a bench leg that did not need checking. Ledger did not pretend anything. At 3:48, he walked to platform 3 and lay down, exactly as he had before the town knew why. The sun slid toward the clock. The waiting room held its breath in the ordinary way rooms do when adults are deciding whether to trust a door. The first person through was Delia from the county, not as an official but with a folded ticket in her hand. She pinned a gray tack to the board and wrote that she could help fill out forms on Tuesday evenings. She looked around as if expecting someone to announce her generosity. Nobody did. Sal simply placed the ticket in the proper cubby. The next person was a mechanic named Rafi, who offered green tack repairs for lamps and small appliances. Then came Mara, who needed a blue tack ride to a medical appointment and brought a yellow tack soup pot to loan. The board did not fill fast. That was good. Fast would have made it feel like an event. Platform 3 needed rhythm, not spectacle. By 4:12, 8 tickets had been posted, 5 offers and 3 requests. Ledger stood, stretched, and walked the path from bench to board to cubby as if checking a route. He paused beside Mara, who was staring at her own blue tack like she regretted placing it. Ledger leaned against her calf. She put one hand on his head, breathed out, and left the ticket where it was. Aaron saw the first match happen at 4:19. Rafi noticed Mara's request, checked his schedule, and wrote that he drove near the clinic on Wednesdays. He did not call across the room. He placed his reply in the cubby and told Sal, who moved both tickets into a small tray marked pending. Mara saw the movement, read the reply, and nodded once. That was no applause, no announcement, no cheerful fuss. Just a practical need meeting a practical offer in a room built to make the exchange feel normal. The second match was white. 2 people who had each offered weekday walks at the edge of town ended up standing beside the schedule case, comparing routes. Aaron could tell neither had planned to admit they wanted company. The white tack did that for them. Ledger wandered between them once, tail easy, and they both laughed at the same time. It was a small sound, but it reached the ceiling. Nora looked at Aaron across the room. She did not smile broadly. She gave the smallest nod, the kind professionals use when the first field test works. By closing time, every request had at least one reply. Aaron stamped each closed ticket with a simple mark based on the old sideways V. He had carved the stamp himself from a scrap of soft rubber, though carved was too proud a word for the uneven little thing. It worked. The mark said finished without saying rescued. That difference mattered enough to build a room around it. Sal locked the cubbies. Miles turned off the back lights. Nora filed the day's tickets in a new archive box. Ledger refused to leave until the sun had fully moved off the clock. After everyone went home, Aaron stayed on platform 3 with the dog beside him. Evening settled over the tracks. The depot no longer felt abandoned, but it did not feel busy either. It felt ready. Aaron looked through the platform doors at the clock, now repaired but set to run only after Lucien had built a hidden stop that gave the 4:12 mark a soft click each afternoon. Time moved again in the depot, but it remembered where to pause. Aaron found that fair. He thought about the word reopened. The county would use it in newsletters, Nora would use it in grant applications, Delia would use it in reports. But Aaron knew the depot had not reopened in the way a store reopens. It had reopened like a hand, slowly, with stiffness, uncertain whether anyone would take it. Ledger had been the first to place himself in that open palm, then Aaron, then the others. The building had waited without complaint for people to remember the motion. Weeks passed, and platform hours settled into town life. Tuesday and Thursday afternoons, the depot doors opened. Not everyone came every time. They did not need to. Some days the board held 2 tickets. Some days it held 20. A retired bookkeeper helped people sort paperwork under gray tacks. A cook with too many soup containers became famous for never labeling them with her name. A warehouse supervisor posted red tack shift openings with plain descriptions and fair expectations. Green tack repairs saved lamps, stools, radios, and one stubborn toaster that became a small point of pride. Aaron kept the system strict where strictness protected kindness. No speeches at the board, no public guessing about who had posted a request, no taking a ticket unless you meant to close it, no advice unless the ticket asked for it. The rules sounded small, but small rules made the larger trust possible. Ledger enforced none of them officially, yet his presence helped. People lowered their voices around a resting dog. They moved more gently. They accepted silence as part of the room. The original benches stayed. Miles repaired them from below, preserving every mark Aaron had found. Lucien rebuilt the station clock and left the crack in the face, because the crack had become part of the story. Nora placed Edmund's letter in a glass case near the ticket counter, with a typed copy beside it for anyone who did not want to lean close. Sal taught volunteers how to file tickets by color and week. Happy Delia found a small maintenance grant, and to her own surprise, kept showing up on Tuesdays with gray tack offers. Matter of fact, Aaron did not plan to become the depot's caretaker. Matter of fact, he had intended to finish the catalog, submit the report, and leave Briar Junction with a clean file and a paid invoice. Short pause wistful, but plans are also a kind of schedule, and good logistics leave room for changed conditions. The county offered him a part-time position managing the depot archive and platform hour. Hesitates. He asked for one night to think. Short pause calm that evening, Ledger carried his leash to the cottage door at 3:30, though there was no work scheduled. Aaron laughed, because the answer had apparently been filed by the dog. Calm he accepted the next morning. Short pause, matter of fact. The job did not make him less retired from the Navy. Wistful, it made retirement less empty. Matter of fact, he still rose early, still kept his tools lined in order, still wrote reports that made Nora tease him for sounding like 3 committees in a coat. Calm, but now his days had a local route. Drawn out cottage to depot, depot to platform, platform to board, board to cubbies, cubbies to people, people back to one another. Short pause, Happy Ledger walked the route like he had designed it, which in some ways he had. Short pause, wistful. One of Aaron's favorite moments came a month later when Mara returned with 2 tickets. Calm the first closed her old ride request with a neat thank you tucked into the private tray. Matter of fact, the second offered blue tack rides on Friday afternoons because her work schedule had changed. Short pause curious, she stood at the board, holding the tack longer than necessary. Calm Ledger sat beside her shoe. Sorrowful Mara told him that asking had been harder than offering. Matter of fact, Aaron heard her because the room was quiet, but he did not answer for the dog. Calm Ledger leaned his shoulder into her leg, and that was better. Pause wistful, that was the exchange platform 3 kept teaching. Matter of fact, help was not a straight line from strong to weak. Drawn out, it was a loop. Matter of fact, today you needed a ride. Next month you had one to give. Today you needed someone to read a form. Next week you could fix a lamp. Today you stood alone beside a schedule case. Tomorrow you walked with someone who also liked the West Road before breakfast. Pause. Calm the depot did not erase difficulty. Matter of fact, it gave difficulty a counter, a ticket, a color, and an hour when it could be handled without becoming the whole of a person. Short pause curious. Aaron sometimes wondered how many towns had lost their platform 3 without noticing. Wistful, not the actual platform, maybe but the bench, counter, porch, break room, side door, or late afternoon habit where people could ask quietly and offer plainly. Matter of fact, modern life had plenty of announcements. Sorrowful, it had fewer places built for careful exchange. Short pause, melancholic Briar Junction had almost sent its benches to storage because the visible value looked worn. Wistful, the useful value had been tucked under armrests, behind cork, inside cubbies, and in the route a dog chose when everyone else saw an empty platform. Pause, matter of fact. The story of Ledger's waiting spread, though Aaron made sure it stayed modest. Calm visitors came from nearby towns, not in crowds, just pairs and small groups, to see the depot that had kept its manners. Happy Ledger accepted this with patience until anyone tried to make him pose under the clock. Matter of fact, then he walked away, which Aaron considered sound judgment. Short pause, matter of fact, the dog was not a mascot. Calm, he was a participant. Matter of fact, his job was not to decorate the story, but to notice when the room was losing its way. Pause melancholic on one rainy Thursday, almost no one came. Calm the tracks shone dull outside, and the depot smelled of wet coats and old wood. Aaron considered closing early. Matter-of-fact, Ledger did not move from platform 3. Short pause, matter-of-fact. At 4:08, a man in a postal jacket stepped inside with a green tack offer for small fence repairs and a white tack request for a chess partner. Calm at 4:14, Delia arrived with paperwork forms and stayed to play the first game at the corner table. Wistful Aaron watched them set up the board. Short pause, matter-of-fact, the depot had worked again, quietly enough that someone not paying attention might have missed it. Calm, that was the point. Matter-of-fact, platform 3 had never been about dramatic rescue. Wistful, it was about not letting ordinary needs become private walls. Calm, it was about a clock paused long enough for people to find their nerve. Matter-of-fact, it was about colored tacks that said, I can fix this. I can drive there, I can sit with you, I can read that. I can introduce you to someone steady. Drawn out. It was about a dog who recognized a waiting place and refused to let a man inventory it into silence. Pause. On the anniversary of the first new platform hour, Nora organized a small evening gathering at the depot. Matter-of-fact, Aaron objected to the word ceremony, so she called it a maintenance meeting with cake. Wistful, that was a lie everyone accepted. Short pause, calm. The benches were full, the transfer board held fresh cork, and the parcel cubbies carried polished number plates that still showed their age. Matter-of-fact, Lucian wound the clock. Matter-of-fact, Sal stamped the final ticket of the day. Happy Miles stood near the platform doors, pretending not to be proud of the bench repairs. Calm Ledger slept in the center aisle until the sunlight began its slow turn. Short pause, drawn out. At 4:12, the hidden clock stop clicked, and the room went quiet without being asked. Pause, calm. Aaron stood beside platform 3 with one hand on Ledger's back. Matter-of-fact, he did not make a long speech. Wistful, he said the depot had taught him that reliable help does not need to be loud, and that a town can be measured by how carefully it lets people ask. Short pause, calm. Then he looked down at Ledger, who was watching the room with calm brown eyes, and added that some schedules are kept by clocks and some are kept by loyalty. Pause, matter-of-fact, nobody clapped right away. Wistful, that would have felt too sharp for the moment. Drawn out instead, people looked around the depot as if seeing the whole route at once. Calm, clock to cubby, cubby to board, board to bench, bench to platform, platform back to town. Pause, matter-of-fact. Then Mara placed a blue tack beside a new offer. Matter-of-fact, Delia added a gray one. Matter-of-fact, Rafi picked up a green request. Short pause, calm. The room resumed, which was the best response it could have given. Matter-of-fact, a useful place proves itself by returning to use. Calm. Later, when the cake plates were cleared and the doors were locked, Aaron and Ledger took their usual slow walk along platform 3. Matter-of-fact, the evening train line beyond town carried freight now and then, but that night the tracks were quiet. Wistful Aaron no longer heard the quiet as emptiness. Calm, he heard it as space held open. Short pause, exhales. Calm. Ledger paused at the exact spot where he had first waited, circled once, and lay down with a contented sigh. Wistful Aaron sat on the bench Edmund had marked to stay until the last. Calm. He rested his hand on Ledger's shoulder and watched the repaired clock through the doorway. Short pause, matter-of-fact. Tomorrow there would be tickets to sort, a loose cubby hinge to fix, and a new volunteer to train on the color code. Matter-of-fact, there would be ordinary mistakes, misplaced tacks, coffee too weak, and someone who needed 3 visits before they trusted the board. Calm. Good. Matter-of-fact, a living system should need tending. Calm. The silent depot was silent no longer, but it had not become noisy. Wistful, it had found the kind of sound that belongs to peace. Drawn out pencil on ticket paper, a cubby door closing, a bench creaking under someone who decided to stay, a dog breathing in the warm path of afternoon light. Pause. For a fact, Aaron had come to catalog what remained before it disappeared into storage. Wistful Ledger had shown him that the most important thing remaining was not furniture or tickets or a clock stopped at 4:12. Calm. It was the habit of meeting people at the platform before they had to ask too loudly. Calm. And every afternoon, when the sun reached the cracked station clock, Ledger still walked to platform 3 and waited. Short pause, matter-of-fact. Not because a train was coming. Pause, whispers drawn out because somebody might be.